Today and across the fence, some Vermont town forests are getting help, and communities are stepping forward to advance recreation, conservation, and the sustainable stewardship of valuable public lands. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. Town forests are a point of pride in communities across the Northeast. These publicly owned parcels are unique to our region and demonstrate our love for the outdoors and the beauty of nature. The men and women who are in charge of managing town forests are our neighbors. They are volunteers who give their time and energy because of their passion for the forest and their town. And now a grant from the U.S. Forest Service will help community volunteers develop town forest action plans that are uniquely tailored to each community. The grant funding will help 10 selected towns plan for diverse uses like recreation, wildlife habitat, forest products, or outdoor classrooms. The 10 communities will receive services from a team of consultants to assist the volunteers in developing their town forest their way. Across the Fence's Keith Silva spoke with community volunteers in 2 towns who earned the Forest Service grant.
Boston, recently Corinth.
The entries in the guest book prove that visitors come from near and far to hike Wrights Mountain in Bradford. Nancy Jones chairs the Bradford Conservation Commission.
My experience has been that it's very important to the people of Bradford. It's a wonderful resource, and educators and families are taking advantage of it.
3.5 miles of trails crisscross 517 acres of this town forest. At an elevation of 1,822 feet, Wrights Mountain is the highest peak in Bradford. The view of the Waits River Valley from the summit is as thrilling as venturing into Devil's Den, a shallow cave on the property. Not long ago, the Bradford Conservation Commission, an all-volunteer group who oversees the property, created a trail map. They got sponsorships from local businesses to offset the cost. Jones thinks more can be done.
We already have a lot of visitors coming to the mountain, as our guest book attests, and we have to believe that many of those people are going into town to get lunch or to go shopping or even stay somewhere close by. So we feel that this is an economic boon to the town, but we'd like to be able to gain some data and some evidence to document this.
I think actually what our next step is going to be is
Bradford is one of 10 town forests selected to take part in the Vermont Town Forest Recreation Planning Community Assistance Program. Each community will receive help to develop town forest recreation and stewardship action plans. Kate Fora is an outreach specialist with Vermont Urban and Community Forestry and UVM Extension. She's helping spearhead this effort.
This project really came out of a need that we heard from communities. A lot of them are really struggling with how to balance the growing interest and the growing use of town forests around the state. We used to say that town forests were kind of Vermont's best hidden secret, or were Vermont's best secret. And unfortunately or fortunately, the secret seems to be out. So we're seeing a lot more interest and use in these properties.
A town forest is land that's owned and managed by a town. There are 168 municipalities in Vermont that are responsible for about 68,000 acres of town forests. For the folks in Bradford, they see Wrights Mountain as a possible engine for economic development, but not if it's at the expense of the resource itself.
This is a multi-use parcel. It's not just for recreation, it's for wildlife preservation, it's for forestry, it's for education. And we don't want any of those to sacrifice by promoting more recreation and more economic benefits to the town. We want to be informed, and we want to make informed decisions and wise decisions about uses of this beautiful land.
I was looking to see if I could show you a fingernail clam.
Brett Engstrom heads the stewardship committee that manages the Virginia Stranahan Memorial Town Forest in Marshfield. A little over 50 miles separates Marshfield and Bradford, but the two communities are connected when it comes to their passion for their town forest.
I'm proud to say that Marshfield has this public land available to people that can come and use it in different ways. And if they want to come out and look at the old stone foundations, you know, and imagine what this place was like 100 years ago, that's wonderful. And it's wonderful if people like to come and bike a little ways, or if they just want to walk and go down to one of the beaver ponds and bird watch. And it's all here. And such a wonderful resource.
Given the diversity of habitats and uses for the town forest in Marshfield, the watchword for Engstrom is balance.
We have all these uses for the town forest, and we need to make sure that we honor the easement, conservation easement, which is to protect the natural resources. But we have different people wanting different recreation types, and it's a balancing act, and we want to get as much information as possible to make good decisions on management.
For Engstrom, stewardship of this town forest goes hand in hand with civic responsibility.
As a committee, we have to grapple with, well, is that good for the forest? Is that an acceptable for everybody involved? Do the hikers like the fact that there are a lot of biking trails? How will it damage the forest soils? I mean, biking trails have an impact for sure. And so we're trying to take that all in and figure out, well, how can we proceed, allow people to recreate and in different ways in the same property.
The Marshfield Stewardship Committee follows best management practices to oversee the forest. What they need from the consultants are best management practices for engaging their fellow citizens.
We're just townspeople. The Stewardship Committee is just 7 people that is trying to help the town figure out how to best manage this. What is the best way to get public input into a planning process? So we really want help with how do you make a public process and get information, and then once you have the information, how do we incorporate that into our management plan for the property?
Marshfield, Bradford, and the other communities taking part in this program are setting an example that town forests are a shared resource for Vermont's people and places. In Marshfield, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
Well, thanks, Keith. Joining me now are 2 guests. Kate Forer is the Urban and Community Forestry Outreach Specialist with UVM Extension, and Drew Pollock-Bruce is a certified park and recreation professional with the SE Group of Burlington. Thanks so much for coming in. So, Kate, we just heard from 2 of the communities that you're going to be working with. What are the other towns that are going to be part of this Forest Service grant?
Sure. So in addition to Bradford and Marshfield, we'll also be working with Hardwick, Huntington, Hartford, Middlebury, Richmond, Wethersfield, at Woodbury and Wells.
And so Bradford and Marshfield obviously were highlighted in the video. What are some of the issues that the 8 other communities are interested in addressing? Yeah,
so we saw basically 3 main issues across the applications, and what we saw was, number 1, overuse, which we saw in the story of Bradford. Communities just really struggling with the demands on their town forest and how to balance those uses. We also saw on the other side of the spectrum underuse or underutilization. We have a number of communities that have recently acquired a town forest, or those town forests have just been sort of sitting and haven't been used to their potential. So there's communities interested in engaging the public and coming up with a plan for how to get folks out into their town forest. And then third, connectivity. We have a couple of communities who are really interested in looking at how to connect their town forests. They own multiple town forests in a community, and so they're interested in trying to figure out how, either through trails or other recreational opportunities, how to link those lands both for in the town and also in the regional context as well.
So what was it about these 10 towns that stood out?
Yeah, so our goal really from the beginning was to walk away with a diversity in terms of the projects and the communities that we were working with. So we're trying to get a representation across that spectrum of need in terms of the challenges that some of these communities are facing. We also looked at geographic distribution and trying to get representation of communities from around the state, both in terms of where they're located, but also in terms of demographics, so the size of community as well as the size of the parcel of town forests. And then finally, the stages of planning, so where the community is at in terms of how much planning they've done. As I mentioned, mentioned, some of the communities are brand new to town forest ownership, and so working with communities that are at the beginning stages, as well as those communities that have had a town forest for a while and maybe have a couple of management plans in place and are looking to pull together the different layers of planning that they've done into one master plan.
So when does this project start?
So the project is kicking off right now. So we've been working actually for the last year with a team of interagency working committee made up of partners from Department of Forest Parks Recreation, as well as the Agency of Commerce and Economic Development and UVM Extension. And we're working with Drew from the SE Group, who is our lead consultant, who are really the experts who will be coming into the communities and helping to engage the planning process over the next year.
And so, Drew, what's the biggest concern that volunteer organizations have when they're looking to develop a plan for these public lands?
And so when we work with these communities, we find, there are such diverse values to our public lands that people will come with a lot of different ideas about how to use them. And so it really depends on the context of the forest and what that community is really interested in. It might be protecting critical habitat or getting kids out into nature. But whatever they want to do, the one common theme is they always want to know what they're doing. They can do it in a sustainable way that will protect the resource in the long term. And so I think that's something that's really important, that they always want to know that they can move forward with confidence, that this is the right thing to do for our forests and our community.
And how does the planning process work?
So the planning process will have quite a number of steps, but it's really all about engaging the community and finding their vision for the future and helping to develop an action plan around that vision. And so we'll have a series of public meetings. We'll have 4 public meetings in each community. The first one we're calling a forest walk. And so we're taking people out into the forest. We're doing a facilitated site tour. We're asking questions about what they'd like to see happening there. We'll also be doing a couple of plan presentations where we're giving them draft concepts and getting feedback. Another really important part of the process is the steering committee, or those local volunteer groups, the conservation commissions, and they're really acting as plan ambassadors to this project. And so they're out in the community getting feedback, talking to people, and also even going to other events. So they're not all having to come to our meetings. We'll have people go to the farmers markets and go to all those little local events and help spread the word there.
In the end, what will the communities walk away with?
The communities will come away with a really robust action plan to move forward with a vision for the future. And so it'll help get everybody on the same page. What do we want to do in our town forest, and what will that look like? And then they'll get actionable strategies to achieve that vision in the future.
And so what will other towns gain from, even if they're not in this particular program, what will they gain from what these other communities, these 10 communities, are learning?
Yeah, so this process that we're looking to do will be a replicable process. So the communities around the state will have tools as well as resources to help them engage in this type of planning effort locally after the project's done.
Now, some towns probably might be interested in the resources for forest products. Does the grant allow for developing sort of timber management or maple sugaring?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely something that some of the communities are going to be interested in pursuing and encouraging. It's important to remember that as a planning grant, this will identify strategies that enable that sort of activity to happen, but it's not actually going to implement anything in the ground with, putting in buckets for the maple sugar.
Infrastructure or anything like that.
Exactly.
And so how do you determine, though, where the balance is between too much development and not enough for your town forest?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, Judy. And for sure, in terms of this process and our role of UVM Extension and bringing these experts like Drew and his team of consultants to communities is to really help communities figure that out at the local level. I think in terms of what that looks like, it's going to be open to individual communities, and that's a process that these communities, are excited to engage in, and hopefully, will walk away with what they need in order to move their programs forward or to move their forest forward.
And it's your hope that what these communities learn will then translate, and other communities can learn from that as well and apply some of the same techniques.
Absolutely, yeah. So we like to think of these 10 communities as kind of pilot communities, and they're helping us to develop these tools, which we can then share with other communities around the state. One of the things that we heard, in this process is there is such a need out there, and so we really have been, in terms of developing this program, keeping our eye to how we can develop this program to meet the needs of other communities around the state, in addition to the 10 that we'll be working individually with.
And I think that's something that's really important to kind of recognize UVM Extension and the state for pursuing this, because it's something that we've all been talking about in the state. You know, Governor Scott has the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative, or VOREC. He just initiated, and this is really dovetailing with that effort to really try and make sure we're using our recreational resources in ways that really support our communities to the best extent they can.
All right. Well, for more information about the Forest Service grant, as well as overall information about the work that the Vermont Communities and Urban Forestry Program is doing, you can check the website, vtcommunityforestry.org. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you,
Thanks
Judy.
so much for having us.
That's our program for today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.